So, Bruchim Habaim, you are welcome to our fourth session on the fourth night of Hanukkah, appropriately enough. And tonight's session is going to cover the question, do Jews cause anti-Semitism? And I'm actually going to play two clips from that series I've been playing. And one is this subject, do Jews cause anti-Semitism? And another one, which is kind of related, is the question, can Jews be anti-Semitic? So we're going to cover that, and we'll have some time for questions and answers. But as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I've got another class I'm teaching an hour from now, so I'm going to not be able to drag on much longer than our allotted time. Or I'll try and cut this off before 8 o'clock our time. So as always, I want to acknowledge the support of the Jewish Federation of Ventura County and the Affordable Living Choices Trust and the Shine a Light organization. I'm not sure it's federations around the country and Canada that are sponsoring this series. And as always, pointing out that I'm recording all of these sessions and posting it both on my website, and there's a PDF also of all the slides on my website. And then I think by now you noticed that I send out emails after each session, which allows you to see the videos. And I know, hard as it is to believe, there are other things going on in the world than gathering here. So I know that many people are able to watch the videos. Here's the discussion. We're right in the middle. So tomorrow night we'll discuss the relevancy of anti-Semitism and who anti-Semitism hurts. We'll take a night off for Shabbat. Saturday night, a focus on the Holocaust. What happened? Could it happen again? And could it happen here? And then Sunday, our community celebration. So I just have a very brief introduction to the video, which is, do Jews or the Jewish state cause anti-Semitism? And one of the things is you will may be surprised how common this belief is. And as you'll see in the video, it is a classic case of blaming the victim for the crime. So I think we can jump into it. And again, I'll look to you, Cheryl, to make sure that we're hearing the sound once we start.
Do Jewish people cause anti-Semitism? This probably seems like an offensive question, and sure sounds like an example of blaming the victim. But a shockingly large number of people believe that Jews cause themselves to be hated, and it's one of the reasons why anti-Semitism has endured for so many centuries. A recent CNN survey found that nearly 1 in 5 Europeans believe that anti-Semitism in their countries was a response to the everyday behavior of Jewish people. An even more commonly expressed version of this belief is the claim that Israel causes anti-Semitism. And that's just the ones who admitted it to a pollster. So back to the question, do Jews or the Jewish state cause anti-Semitism? If we're going to uproot anti-Jewish prejudice, it's crucial to understand exactly why the claim is so egregiously wrong, logically, historically, and morally. Unfortunately, the idea that Jews are responsible for their own persecution is not some fringe idea. Take Swedish Public Radio, the country's equivalent of NPR. In early 2015, host Helena Groll interviewed Isaac Bachman, Israel's ambassador to Sweden, in the wake of 2 deadly anti-Semitic attacks in Europe. But Groll didn't ask the Israeli envoy what non-Jews could do to stop this virulent anti-Semitism. Instead, she asked,
do the Jews themselves have any responsibility in the growing anti-Semitism that we see now?
Bachman, unsurprisingly, was shocked.
Well, I reject the question altogether. The question of how a woman contributes for the fact of being raped is irrelevant altogether. I don't think that there is any provocation the Jews are doing. They just exist.
As we noted in an earlier video, the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights has found that 60% of Swedish Jews fear to publicly identify as Jewish. That Groll, a respected member of the media, felt comfortable blaming Jews for their own abuse helps explain why. Grohl didn't stop digging, however. She went on.
But a lot of people would look at the Middle East today and say there is conflicts that we know between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And a lot of people might say, we see the Gaza war, we see things that have been happening, that the Israelis and the Jews in Israel have a responsibility to reactions that are coming.
After outrage on social media over this bizarre exchange, the public radio station apologized for the interview and purged it from their online archives. But erasing the evidence of bigotry is not the same as confronting and debunking it. In her interview, Grohl said that a lot of people think as she does. So why are these people mistaken? Simply put, the idea that Jews or Israel cause anti-Semitism is wrong for three interrelated reasons: logic, history, and morality. Logic. Take the notion, sometimes presented by well-meaning people, that Jews came to be despised as miserly and greedy because they were forbidden from owning land or holding most occupations, and so were compelled to become moneylenders in the Middle Ages. The argument is that Jews came to be associated with money and thus hated for their money. Jewish behavior caused Jew hatred. It's a very convenient tale to explain anti-Semitism, but it doesn't actually make sense. After all, why were Jews restricted from so many professions and not permitted to own land? The underlying anti-Semitism predated the conduct that allegedly caused it. Supposed Jewish miserliness was an excuse for anti-Semitism, not the explanation. This underscores a fundamental point. Like most groups subjected to bigotry, Jews are hated not because of what they do, but because of who they are. A small minority that is different from the majority. This intolerant dynamic stays the same, while the justifications for it change over time. That's why if you get rid of one rationale for anti-Semitism, a new one just takes its place. And these explanations never stand up to scrutiny. History. Take the claim that the modern state of Israel, the home of half the world's Jews, causes anti-Semitism. Studies and headlines show that when the Jewish state engages in military action, anti-Semitic acts tend to spike in parts of Europe. But if we reflect on the last 1,000 years of history, we see that once again, this is not the cause of the anti-Semitism, it's the cover story for it. From the Crusades, to the Spanish Inquisition, to the Holocaust, anti-Semitism plagued Europe and beyond long before Israel was established in 1948. The Jewish state couldn't provoke any of these anti-Jewish assaults. It didn't exist. In fact, Europe's utter inability to protect its Jews was a major reason why many of them fled to found their own state. The effort to pin Jew hatred on the Jewish state, then, is an attempt to invert cause and effect in order to evade historical responsibility. But ascribing anti-Semitism to Jews or Israel is not just wrong logically and historically. It's also wrong morally. We don't consider it acceptable or understandable to blame the victims of bigotry in any other context, or at least we shouldn't. It's never okay to attack random Jews over the actions of completely different Jews thousands of miles away in the Middle East. Just like it's never okay to attack random Muslims over the actions of Muslim groups or countries thousands of miles away in the Middle East. It's as absurd and offensive as assailing a French person in New York over the actions of French people in Paris. This sort of racist thinking isn't the cause of anti-Semitism, it's the essence of anti-Semitism. That people still blame Jews or Israel for anti-Semitism in polite company, just as today many still blame black people for racism, or women's dress for rape, shows just how embedded anti-Jewish assumptions still are, even in educated enclaves. But while anti-Semites may cite Jewish actions to justify their prejudice, we know better, and we don't have to fall for it. Jews don't cause anti-Semitism. Anti-Semites do.
So one of the things that I did, I don't have a lot of my own material to present here because I think the videos do a pretty good job. But I captured and wrote down for you the examples of rationales that people have used over the years for anti-Semitism, and these are sort of stereotypes about Jews, that Jews are greedy, Jews spread plague. I mean, one of the things we learned actually in discussions of one of you this reported this anti-Semitic act that occurred just a few days ago in Beverly Hills. There was a flyer and some material being distributed, and apparently that's exactly the accusation, that COVID was a tool of the Jews. And I don't know if it's, you know, similar on the same lines, but for me at least equally offensive, and I think this is a member of Congress, comparing Dr. Fauci to Dr. Mengele. I mean, just to mention those people in all seriousness in the same sentence is horrific. The idea of Jews wanting power, Jews killing Jesus. We talked about this in an earlier session. Jews are tribal. You know, as the clip was playing, I was thinking it's sort of ironic that in many cultures, Jews are confined into ghettos and forbidden to live literally outside the pale of settlement in Russia, ghettos in various cities, and then criticized for being tribal. Jews do live in communities. I talk about this with my students who are interested in conversion, that although you can be a Jew by choice, you can't be a Jew by self. And in traditional Judaism, you need to walk to your local synagogue on Shabbat, which means that in traditional Jewish communities, not necessarily true these days, but in traditional Jewish communities, you had to live within a walking distance of a synagogue. So there are Jewish neighborhoods. Jewish neighborhoods are a natural consequence of Jewish law. The other thing that I want to highlight is the danger of this phrase, a lot of people think, or a lot of people say. You can follow that with almost anything. And to use that as a, you know, as a rational argument for anything is very, very frightening, because there's a lot of sick, twisted people out there. And to say a lot of people say, you know, that Jews bring this on themselves, that Israel brings it on itself, as a reason is horrible. I think the next, yeah. So we'll pause just a moment. We're going to jump into the next video in a moment, which is on can Jews be anti-Semitic? But I'm curious as to if any of you have reaction. You can either raise your hands and I'll recognize you, or just unmute yourself and chime in. I don't see anybody raising their hands. Okay, so I'm gonna move ahead. Oh, go ahead, Barbara. You look like you're unmute yourself. Thank you.
Oh, is that okay now?
Yeah.
Okay, good. My brother is anti-Semitic, and it's very painful for me that he believes that the Palestinians should be given back their land, that there should be reparation, that they should be, and it's really difficult living with someone who is so opposite. And I just wanted to say
Yeah,
that.
thank you. And presumably he's Jewish.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's actually going to be the subject exploring. I appreciate your saying that. And by the way, in that spirit, one of the things that's nice about interfaith groups that I'm a member of, and we, you know, a few of us were on earlier, and one of you was asking me a question about churches, Christian churches holding model seders, and whether that was offensive. One of the things that a forum like this is helpful toward is the ability to ask questions that people might be shy of asking questions about. And one of the things, and I've actually had others of you, 2 or 3, or maybe more of you, send me emails outside the class asking questions. And so I want to emphasize, you know, time, and there's now 37 of us on in the session, make it a little difficult for everybody to ask everything. But you should know that you can always ask me questions, that this is a safe environment, which I find very helpful, because, you know, we're always a little nervous. Am I going to ask an insulting question? I will never consider a question asked in good faith as an insulting question. And also, you should always feel free contact me through my email, which is, very simple. It's just lotger@aol.com. I often comment. Moses still has his AOL account. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob still have their AOL accounts, and so do I. So thank you. Any other thoughts before we jump into the next video? Yeah, Ira, go ahead. Unmute yourself.
Well, I think it's rather interesting that people say that, the Jews are tribal and want to be off on their own, when in reality, there's groups of non-Jews, like you hear them chanting, "Jews will not replace us." And I think they themselves are being tribal in that they're trying to harken back to a mythic past in America, say, where before the Jews or other ethnic groups were here.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I see a tribal thing going both ways.
Yeah, and one of the things I would say, Jews are tribal, and it's David Wolpe that says if the word weren't so loaded, that would probably not be a bad way of describing this sort of unique mix of peoplehood and religion. But one of the things I think is also true is that humans are tribal, and we literally have in our DNA this sense that it's us against them. And if you look a little different, or you speak differently, or a different language, then I really need to be careful and be worried about you. And one of the things that I think religion at its best is designed to fight that, particularly Judaism, Christianity, Islam, all recognizes, at least in theory, whether individuals do or not is another question, the idea that we're all created in the image of God, and yes, we're tribal, that's the tribe, humanity. Yeah, go ahead.
Just wanted to say one other thing is, because I know my family's from Los Angeles, the Fairfax area in there, and the whole family all lived in the same neighborhood, and it was very tribal in that sense. But yet, I think Jews who live in all of the different countries around the world where they've resided have tried to also assimilate into society while still retaining our Jewish culture. So it's not like, I never got the feeling that my extended family was trying to cut themselves off, sort of like the Amish or something.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted us to speak English. They wanted us to be American. They wanted, so.
Yeah, and the old joke was in the last generation about people changing their names, and you have lists of actors that are Jewish that clearly have non-Jewish names, and now I would say I think it's a general cultural element in our day that people embrace ethnicity and difference of ethnicity and are happy to maintain that. But you're absolutely right, and we talked about this last night. I think Jews have this interesting mix of being together. I think I mentioned, at least in every class I teach, the word religion comes from the same root word as the word for ligament. It's that which connects. So religion connects people, and hopefully we connect not only within our faith traditions, but across them. And Jews have an obligation to be a light to the nations. So therefore, somebody has to deal with the non-Jewish world. And since Jews are, only 0.2% of the world, if we're truly going to be a light to the nations, we've got to interact with the nations. Some of the Jewish philosophers propose that the reason for the diaspora, for the spread of Jews around the world, is to bring the Bible to the world. And as I say, in that way, the story of the God of Abraham is the religion of the God of Abraham is the religion of half of humanity, 50%, and certainly not just 0.2%. Jay.
Yeah, going with this gentleman on the bottom of my screen here says, are the blacks tribal because they live in a black neighborhood? Are the Chicanos tribal because they live in South Tucson, not in Tucson itself?
Yeah,
Yes.
I think
if we go to
people.
New York,
I
if we
think
go to New York,
there are
uh,
neighborhoods.
there are Jewish neighborhoods, um, even where I live right here.
Mhm.
Yes, the Jews will hang out with the Jews, the majority of the Jews here will hang out with the Jews.
Yeah,
Yes,
so
I think we are tribal.
yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think many groups want to hang out with their, with people come from the same country, Italian neighborhoods, Asian neighborhoods, and in terms of Black, in many cases, that's called segregation. It's a question of whether it's voluntary or not. Is a very interesting
Well, isn't
question.
segregation another word for tribal? Let's take a city that I
well-
don't know anybody on the screen is from. Let's take Boston. Boston has an Italian neighborhood. It has a Jewish neighborhood. It has I'm
Yeah,
sure there's
no,
a Black neighborhood.
yeah.
And for many years, boy, if you were white, you did not go into a Black neighborhood. And if you were Black, you sure as hell didn't go into a white neighborhood. And if you wanted Chinese food, you had to go to the Chinese neighborhood.
Right. What I would say segregation is that element enforced by laws and enforced by by redlining and others. What I think the point of the video is, you don't hear a lot about people hating Italians because Italians are tribal and live in Italian neighborhoods. So it's an accusation against the Jews. So I'm going to move on to the next video.
In October 2017, ex-CIA agent and noted anti-war activist Valerie Plame shared an article from an anti-Semitic website with her 50,000 Twitter followers. Its title, "America's Jews Are Driving America's Wars." As outrage mounted, Plame defended her choice by noting, "I am of Jewish descent," an apparent reference to her single Jewish grandparent. On the surface, this sounds like a compelling case. After all, can a Jew or someone with Jewish heritage really be anti-Semitic or say anti-Semitic things? As it turns out, yes. To understand how, we've got to go all the way back to the Middle Ages to someone you've probably never heard of. In 1238, a Jewish apostate named Nicholas Donin traveled to Rome and personally denounced the Talmud as anti-Christian to Pope Gregory IX. This set in motion a chain of events that led to the largest mass burning of the Talmud in recorded history, with some 10 to 12,000 volumes of the foundational Jewish work set ablaze in France. This was before the advent of the printing press, and these books were all handwritten and irreplaceable. The event was so traumatic that for hundreds of years on Tisha B'Av, the National Jewish Day of Mourning, observant Jews have recited a haunting prayer commemorating the tragedy. And all of this happened because of a Jew. Sad to say, Donin's story is not unique. Historically, Jews have excelled at many things, including anti-Semitism. This can seem counterintuitive at first glance, but it's also quite well documented, and one doesn't have to go back to the 13th century to find it. Take Gilad Atzmon, a noted Israeli musician and activist living in London today. In 2011, he published a book called The Wandering Who? A Study of Jewish Identity Politics. It's a cartoonishly anti-Semitic tract. In it, Atzmon dubs American Jews the enemy within, questions the historical facts of the Holocaust, and claims that robbery and hatred are inherent to Jewish political ideology. Atzmon has also compiled lists of suspect Jews in the US government and declared, "We must begin to take the accusation that the Jewish people are trying to control the world very seriously." Consider another British personality, Jackie Walker. As a leader of the powerful leftist political group Momentum, Walker was instrumental in consolidating power for Jeremy Corbyn, the former British Labour Party leader from 2015 to 2020. Her work was even spotlighted in the New York Times. She also labeled Jews the chief financiers of the African slave trade, a libel long debunked by historians. When confronted with the facts, Walker not only refused to apologize, but insisted she could not be anti-Semitic because she possessed Jewish heritage. She subsequently questioned whether Jewish schools needed additional security protection and criticized Britain's Holocaust Memorial Day. This phenomenon of Jewish anti-Semitism is not limited to one part of the political spectrum. In 2016, in the heat of the US presidential campaign, Joshua Seidel wrote an op-ed for the Jewish newspaper The Forward titled, "I'm a Jew and I'm a member of the alt-right." In it, he defended the typical anti-Jewish rhetoric often heard from this openly anti-Semitic part of America's political spectrum. Even the son of Israel's prime minister once shared an anti-Semitic cartoon about a Jewish conspiracy that was then championed by white supremacist David Duke. Here's the thing. While all of these individuals cite their heritage as a shield against accusations of anti-Jewish animus, that's a distraction, not an argument. Racism is racism, no matter who says it. It's the substance of bigotry that matters, not the source. So why do some Jews do this? In general, there seem to be two chief motivations behind such behavior. The first is that minorities often absorb stereotypes about themselves from the majority. When everyone around you shares certain assumptions about your community, it can be easy to subconsciously accept them. This is how Karl Marx, who was ethnically Jewish, but whose father converted to Christianity, could write things like, "What is the worldly religion of the Jew? Huckstering. What is his worldly god? Money." Scholars call this internalized racism, and it's something many Jews and other minorities have experienced. More insidious are those Jews who adopt the assumptions of anti-Semites wholesale and make them their political program. For these individuals, anti-Semitism is a punch card to power in places where their community is despised and ostracized. By separating themselves from most other Jews and justifying prejudice towards them, these people hope to insulate themselves from anti-Semitism and obtain influence among growing political movements that are otherwise hostile to Jews. By throwing other Jews under the anti-Jewish bus, they hope to save themselves from it. For this reason, Donin sought to prove his Christian cred by denouncing the Talmud to the church. Joshua Seidel attempted to insinuate himself into the alt-right by defending their anti-Jewish conduct, and Jackie Walker aimed to access the elite of the British Labour Party, which was later found by a government watchdog to have engaged in widespread anti-Semitic conduct, by repeating and defending anti-Semitic ideas. But the truth is, nothing about these people's Jewish background makes their words or actions less reprehensible. When Miko Peled, an anti-Israel activist and son of an Israeli general, justified calling Jews sleazy thieves, the fact that he was Jewish didn't make the stereotype any less racist. And when Plame tweeted that America's Jews are driving America's wars, her claim of Jewish descent didn't make it any less bigoted. Whether a Jew engages in anti-Semitism for ideological or psychological reasons, the end result is the same and should never be excused.
Okay, so I'll ask the same question. What do you think? And Barbara, I appreciate your sharing your thoughts. And why do you think some Jews and most of us who are deeply involved in Jewish life are familiar with Jews that are the phrase that I remember hearing a lot are self-hating Jews that engage in this. So what do you think, and why do you think Jews publicly support anti-Jewish and anti-Israel causes?
She's muted.
I don't know who's talking actually.
Okay, what I wanted to say, are they embarrassed by some of the things that go on, some of the things that happen with Jewish people? Like whenever there's something in the news and you hope, oh my goodness, I hope somebody Jewish wasn't involved in that.
So
possibility that they just want to not be associated because they don't want to be embarrassed.
I think that's valid. There's always there's a bunch of sort of dark humor about that where someone commits a murder and or a child is killed in the Middle Ages, and then the Jewish community is relieved when they find out the child was Jewish rather than the perpetrator
Well,
being Jewish.
it happens now, and it's just not in the Middle Ages.
Yeah, I would say it happens in the sense of when something horrible happens. I would say we Jews get particularly upset if we find out that the perpetrator is Jewish, and but then becoming anti-Semitic seems a strong reaction to it. Helena.
Yeah, I think it's sometimes people are seeking power and seeking influence. And I think maybe at the beginning, they don't think that they're going to become anti-Semitic, but in order to, with the group that they're looking for, which they said so often, but we can see, and especially, I also think people who say they had Jewish heritage, sometimes they were not raised with Jewish values. So, I came from, my father was Jewish and my mother was Catholic, and we were raised Catholic. And I asked her from the time I was 13, could I be Jewish? No way, not under her roof. So my mother, in a way, was a little anti-Semitic, right? Even though, and my father remained quiet from the whole thing, and I converted later on. And just to tell you that my siblings really had mixed feelings about it all. We were not raised with the Jewish traditions or values. And me being the oldest, I'm the one who knew my grandmother the best, my Jewish grandmother. The others didn't. She died when I was 13. So, now they're coming to terms with that, right? Because I did a lot of genetic work. We did a lot of seeking out our relatives and stuff like that. And so it's not so easy anymore to just sort of deny who you are. And I think that's anti-Semitic, when you deny who you are.
So what I would say is, if your mother didn't want her children to be Jewish,
yeah,
I think a reasonable explanation for that is that she had a deep and abiding belief in Christianity. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is it is possible that she had a deep and abiding belief in Christianity and felt it was the correct path. And so I would say that is not anti-Semitic at all. If, on the other hand, she believed that Jews are the children of Satan and are responsible for horrible things, then I would say that is anti-Semitic.
So it's a little gray area here. I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's my mother, and I can only answer for her, I can't answer for others, didn't want us to be other than her. And many Jews are like that, right? Yes. They want their children, they don't want their children to be other. So when I converted to Judaism, my mother said to me two things. You always wanted to do that. That's the truth. And two, you have hurt me deeply. So, but when I see people saying I have Jewish heritage, what I'm saying is they're not raised with Jewish values. They don't understand it. And they may even be ashamed of it. And so they have a tendency to deny it. That's all.
Yeah. I also think there's an element, and they mentioned it in the video, that if I just have something to say which is anti-Semitic, that may not be particularly newsworthy. On the other hand, if I'm Jewish, and I come out with anti-Semitic teachings, all of a sudden that gives me a prominence and a credibility that I might otherwise not have.
And that's power, right? Isn't that power?
Yes.
Yeah, I agree.
But I also think, I work with a lot of people converting to Judaism, and one of the questions we always ask is, how is your family handling this? Because a very important Jewish value is shalom bayit, which is peace in the household. I had one person, I can't remember if I mentioned it in this series, who was interested in converting to Judaism, but he was going to keep it secret from his wife. And there was, because she was a very single-minded Christian. I don't want to, use a pejorative, and would not be able to accept that. So he was going to convert in secret, and that was not acceptable. Sherry and then Jamie.
To what someone was asking before about when we see the news, we say a little prayer right away. I hope the victim wasn't Jewish. I hope the perpetrator wasn't Jewish,
Mm-hmm.
because I believe that Jews have what I call a collective consciousness, that we take responsibility for our behavior in the whole, in the aggregate. What Madoff did, what Milken did. I remember Son of Sam going, oh my God, well, he was adopted. Well, he wasn't really Jewish, was he? It's the collective shame that we feel that makes us want to make things right. And we don't forget it, because I grew up in a very Italian Catholic neighborhood in New York. And I've asked my Italian friends, do you feel a collective shame for what the mafia does, or depictions of Italians on TV? I mean, I would feel horrified if the Sopranos were actually the Goldbergs. I mean, I would really, but this doesn't, it's in our deep, deep DNA. So it gives us the ability to not only feel the pain of others, but to do something about it.
And I think there's also a fear in there that if someone who is publicly Jewish does something horrible, that not only brings shame on the community, can bring real danger to the community.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Jamie, and then Terry.
I just wanted to comment that I don't think it's necessarily unusual that a group from a minority would latch on to beliefs held from the majority, because I mean, you know, like you see it with women being like anti-feminist or having beliefs on chauvinism, or like I have a gay friend who complains sometimes there are gay people who complain about like boys sounding feminine or having effeminate voices. And so like you see like anti-women amongst women and anti-gay amongst gays. And so I don't think it's necessarily always even like malicious. I think a lot of times it's just ignorance and the fact that you're surrounded by it all the time and not challenged on it often. So yeah, I just wanted to comment.
Okay, thank you. Terry?
I'm finding this conversation very interesting, and I am a Christian, and at one time I would have called myself an evangelical or a fundamentalist, and I am not. But when Christianity comes into the political realm now, and for example, in the votes, when they say that the Christians voted such and such a way, and this is what they want, somebody said it's their values. I went, what am I, chopped liver? What are my values? They don't equal what these people are representing as Christians. So my stomach turns when Christians, quote unquote, do things that are offensive. And I feel that whole weight of, I am a Christian, and yet I have to hold what these people are doing and I don't agree with. Does that make any sense?
It absolutely makes sense. Charlene, I thought I saw your hand up.
Yeah, well, I just think it's kind of a fear in a way that then all of a sudden people know you're Jewish and they know that this Jewish person did this. And so they're not very nice to you anymore. It's like, can it be a fear?
Yeah, I think there's a fear of backlog. And, you know, part of Jewish tribalism, there's a saying, it's probably Talmudic, Kol Yisrael Averim Zeh B'Zeh. Every Israelite, every Jew has a responsibility to every other Jew. So, for example, you know, when the Jews in Ethiopia were undergoing just horrible living conditions, partially because they were Jewish, but partially because they were in Ethiopia. Israel, got, to the extent that it could, everyone out, because although there was, people talk about cultural Judaism, there was very little culturally similar between the Jews living in Israel and the Jews living in Ethiopia. It's a different race, different culture, all kinds of interesting things. But there is this sense that that we have responsibility to one another, which is a positive thing in terms of helping, but it also is, there is a guilt by association. I mean, we saw this during a time when the Soviet Jews were having such a difficult time. Most of in my children's generation of being bar and bat mitzvah, every bar and bat mitzvah kid had a Soviet twin, and we would be writing to the families. And I was fortunate enough when I went to Israel to actually meet the family of my son's bar mitzvah twin, who had actually made it out. Vern. You are muted, Vern.
I think within a lot of ethnic groups and minority groups, there's a certain level of pride of who we are. And when something bad happens and the perpetrator comes from that group, there's a profound level of embarrassment. Some years ago, I was working in a program and we had kids who were doing probation hours, and they came from various backgrounds. And there was a lady that worked in that program who was Filipino. And she was a sweet little grandmotherly lady who was never negative toward any of the kids that were there. And one day she ran across a Filipino kid that was there. And she really chewed him out. She said, because you're Filipino, you can't do this. We expect more from you. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's a fairly common thing in cultures of particularly perceived minority groups. Mm-hmm. Although I think by now in America, we realize that we're all kind of minority groups of whatever sense.
Yeah, but I think it's actually a positive thing in tribalism, that you represent not only yourself, but you represent your community. I mean, I'm always very conscious when I'm out in public and I'm wearing a yarmulke, I'm not only representing myself, I am representing Jews, Judaism, and God. If I act like a jerk, which I know you'll all be shocked and dismayed to learn this, that it's happened to me. If I'm wearing a yarmulke while I'm acting like a jerk, I bring disgrace not only on me, but in my perception on Judaism and on God. Blindermans.
I have a question. Are Jews for Jesus anti-Semitic?
Oh, that's a great question.
Thank you.
Yeah, doesn't mean I have a great answer. What I would say is Jews for Jesus are Christians, or they're preaching Christianity, not a form of Judaism. And I have great tolerance. I hope my Christian friends will support my supposition that I have great tolerance and love of Christianity, but I don't have much patience for Jews for Jesus or Messianic Judaism, because my understanding on that, although there may be sincere individuals that are part of those groups are basically funded by evangelical Christian groups who want Jews to convert to Christianity without realizing it. That we'll still have, yarmulke and a tallis and practice seders. I was talking with Linda earlier about a seder, but the seder now becomes Christological, that the blood on the doorpost becomes the blood on the cross. I've counseled people who are buying a tallis, a prayer shawl, online, and I said, you really need to be careful if you're buying prayer shawls online, because a lot of them, like 8 out of 10, if you just Google tallis to buy, 8 out of 10 of them are Messianic Jewish tallis, talesim. And so unless you can read the Hebrew or notice images like fish on the tallis that you might not know, very few of them will actually have a cross. And actually, I think that's more honest. but really what they're trying to do is, subversively get Jews to say, what's the big deal? Some Jews are waiting for the Messiah. Some Jews think the Messiah was this guy Jesus 2,000 years ago. What's the big deal? The big deal is, who is God? The big deal is, what does God demand of us? The status of Jewish law. That's the big deal. Not so much whether Jesus was the Messiah. That could be, and what we mean by Messiah, that could be an interesting issue to discuss in the first century, 1900 years ago, but it's become very different. But are Jews for Jesus anti-Semitic? I would say if their goal is to eliminate Judaism, that's anti-Semitic. And I would say amongst Christian evangelical groups, there are people whose goal it is to make everyone Christian. Clearly that includes Jews. And so, it's an interesting question of terminology. Never thought of it in those terms before. We're going to be moving toward wrapping up. Jay.
Okay. Why do you think Jews publicly support anti-Jewish and anti-Israel causes? I'm looking at that and I'm thinking of these Jews that you had on a couple minutes ago, making derogatory Jewish remarks. They were doing it for power.
Yeah, somebody else.
Which is the first thing that you had on the screen tonight.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to bring that out to the public. And I would also like to say that I think that one reason, it could be a main reason, but it is definitely an important reason, that there is anti-Semitic stuff going on in the world, is up until about 50 years ago, Jews were called the killer of Christ. And this was preached in every Christian church.
It was not preached in every Christian church 50 years ago. It is a common accusation, but don't overstate it.
What percentage of Christian churches do you think preached it?
50 years ago, I would say it would be less than half. Because the Catholic doctrine, which is half of Christians, changed with Vatican II, which was more than 50 years ago on that specific subject. But we talked about Christian anti-Semitism. I want to emphasize, I agree with your main point, that it's power. If a Jew comes out and speaks against the state of Israel, that's newsworthy, much more newsworthy than if a non-Jew does. And somebody mentioned, if a woman speaks out against anti-feminist rules or laws or actions, that's newsworthy. John, you're muted.
So yeah, so I would clarify, I raised Christian, spent the majority of my life until just the last couple of years as a Christian. I will say that just to clarify what has been said, I can't speak to pre-50 years ago personally. I'm assuming post World War II is probably going to cover this for sure, because from what I understand, a lot of things changed. I really can't speak with authority on that. So the one thing that you will clearly hear, because if I was just reading this just to kind of verify like some stuff, just reading New Testament, there's a phrase in Thessalonians where they say the Jews killed our Lord. I mean, it's like that. We've probably heard it. It's a very, in the New Christian New Testament, more than one spot, it says that. So I can understand people repeating that and using that as a thing. Just so everyone's clear, the way it's phrased in modern churches, they don't ever, I've never heard anybody say, the Jews, that guy down the street, they're the ones who killed it. That is not how it's phrased. It is very clearly packaged as the Pharisees of 2,000 years ago did it. Maybe that's like at the worst case. They actually often mention that, no, it's really a Roman thing, that it was legally the Romans actually did it. The Jews couldn't have done it because they didn't have that level of authority. They weren't the ones actually, Jews did not crucify. They understand that. Like historically, that's completely inaccurate. They did not, that's never been mentioned in Tanakh anywhere to nail people to a tree. So just so everyone's clear, like the modern, any Christian you hear nowadays isn't going to look around and just not go around and say, oh yeah, the Jews, these guys, that's the ones who did. No, they like, at least the way it's packaged to them is the Pharisees, a certain sect of Judaism, was tied in with it, if at all, if they ever say that at all. And there's been a very clear effort to distinguish between people 2,000 years ago and anyone walking around today, just in case anyone's wondering about that.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. Okay, I'm going to bring this to a close because in a few minutes I'm opening up a new Zoom room, and I'm just posted in the chat if anybody wants to join that class. It's 18 sessions on Jewish literacy. Like this, I post videos. It's on my website, and tonight's class is actually on Midrash, Jewish legal codes and Jewish law. So if anyone's interested, it's not in this Zoom room. So I just posted a link to the Zoom room I use for all my other classes. So I am going to stop the video.